Hello and welcome to A Glass with me, Ollie Smith. I'll be pairing the great and the good with a glass of something sparkling, spirited, or simply superb, whilst we tickle our taste buds with laughs and life stories. So pour yourself a glass of what you fancy, listen in, and enjoy.
Let's have a glass with Ollie Smith. Celebs drinking wine with Ollie Smith. He'll get his famous guests enjoyably tipsy, sharing stories, laughs, and some hyperbole. Naturally. So let's have a glass with Ollie Smith, 'cause he's the kind of guy you'd like to have a glass with. Or two, or three, or maybe a bottle to share. Then tell your life story from a booze-based perspective.
Hello and welcome to A Glass With. It was a real honour for me to sit down with my guest in this episode, Sir Trevor McDonald. And for those of you who are listening around the world, to give some kind of context as to Sir Trevor's standing in the UK, if there was a royal family for news, Sir Trevor would be the king. I mean, he really has been a fixture and a welcome, constant, steady voice in our news landscape for many, many years. I was so delighted to find out how much he loved wine. So we sat down together and we sipped a pretty iconic glass of Puligny Montrachet. And this particular Puligny Montrachet, which is a white Burgundy Chardonnay grape made by domain Jacques Prieur, Les Combettes Premier Cru 2017. Sunny vintage, fermented and aged in oak, which gives a wonderful breadth to the wine and it retains this incredibly bright tension. If you imagine a tense lemon, and I mean that in a positive way, a kind of a shrill bit of bite to the wine, so it's as refreshing as it is rich. Really, all you need to know is it's Chardonnay that's plush and turned up to 11, but retains this absolutely dancing vitality. And I sourced this particular bottle from Corney & Barrow in the UK. I have a few other people to thank, actually, for this episode. Ruthie and Charles at the River Cafe, where we were recording. You may hear in our interview there's some coming and going of chefs. We were right next to the kitchen. And we went on to have an amazing lunch. And actually, some of the things that Sir Trevor shared over lunch were really fascinating. Notably, his adoration for the music of Pink, who, of course, was our first guest ever on A Glass With. So that was just wonderful to hear, and I wished we'd caught that for the show, but I thought I'd share it with you here in any case. So I shall bring you Sir Trevor without any further ado. Enjoy the episode. As you'll hear, he has one of those voices that is instantly reassuring and comforting and full of wisdom. And so it is a total honour to introduce A Glass With Sir Trevor McDonald.
Let's have a glass with Ollie Smith.
Well, I'm absolutely delighted to be sharing a glass with Sir Trevor McDonald. I mean, National Treasure doesn't quite do it, really. You are the National Treasuree.
Well, I'm not sure about that, but the thought of sharing a glass of wine is always nice.
Well, this is the point of the show, is that I pair my guests with a particular bottle, and I've plucked from my cellar a bottle of Puligny Montrachet Les Combettes 2017 Premier Cru, made by domain Jacques Prieur.
Just the name Puligny Montrachet does it for me.
Oh, well, I'm pleased you're already in for that.
Absolutely wonderful.
Well, the reason I chose it was because, obviously, there's a sort of an iconic reverence
absolutely.
to the wine, as there is with you, but there's also that trust over many years. You know, it's a wine that has garnered respect. It's a wine that's different in each iteration every year.
Yeah.
And yet there's a consistently high caliber to the wine.
Oh, the name does it every time. And these days, it's a little probably too expensive to buy in restaurants at dinner, but to share a glass with you in this way is wonderful.
Well, I didn't realise when we first met that you were actually really quite into wine.
Well, I mean, into wine, yes. In my later years, I was born in the West Indies, in Trinidad. And as you know, rum punch is the drink, and rum and so on. Although my father, just before he passed on, much preferred me to bring him back Chivas Regal whiskey. But although we are rum culture, and it's not until my later life when I came to London and so on, I actually got into the business of wine, which has proved very costly.
You know, I've fallen into the same trap, and it's one of those lovely treats in life, though.
Yeah, but you made a profession out of it.
How did I do that?
Yes, so
How on
that's
earth?
nice.
Well, it is, but it's baffling as well, because I started out delivering boxes in a wine shop, and as you can see, the whole thing's got completely out of control.
Not out of control yet.
Not quite. But in seriousness, I love the endless kind of richness of the subject.
Yeah.
There's always something fresh to look at. There's always something new to report on. There's always a new way of making wine. But I suppose there's also, looking back, there's moments with wine. And, this will be a cherished moment for me, a great glass with you. Here we are at the River Cafe. You might be able to hear some prep going on in the background. But it marks a moment, an occasion. And there must have been times in your life where you've been poured a glass of wine and either thought, wow, this is...
Yes, probably a little too frequently on evenings during lockdown too. But you're right, it's luckily possible to associate wine with places. I remember many, many years ago, I was in Australia with an England cricket team, and the team had moved on, and one of the players who had been injured was staying in Sydney. And I said, we'll go to lunch on Saturday, and I'll take you down to the harbour for lunch. When we went into this restaurant, to the left was the Opera House, in front of you was the Sydney Harbour, with 1,000 boats in the water, and then the Sydney Harbour Bridge. And we were drinking Horton's White Burgundy, I think, eating barramundi and chips.
Yes.
And I said to him, it was a Leicestershire player called Roger Tolchard, and I said, Roger, I think we've died and gone to heaven. It was absolutely blissful. So you remember places and wines, and that's really nice.
And you mentioned cricket, which I also love. And again, one of those topics that lends itself very handily to a few glasses of wine, sitting watching the cricket with a glass.
Yeah.
And especially actually Australia, you've brought the Aussies up. I love their culture of
great.
Enjoyment.
And we went in Adelaide, when the team moved on to Adelaide, went up, of course, to the Barossa Valley. Am I right?
Yeah,
there?
yeah.
Have I got the geography right?
Yeah, you have, yeah.
Yeah. And that's just
it's heaven, isn't it?
Gorgeous.
Have you got a particular favourite grape or go-to wine that you really love?
So Pinot Noir tends to be, especially, on a nice Australian evening.
Yes.
Yeah, quite glorious, really, to remember.
Yeah, and I think the culture of Australia grabbed me quite early on for the accessibility of it all.
Yes.
Because any subject, I remember watching you deliver endless fantastic headlines in a way that seemed accessible, and yet I knew I was getting some rich information. And really with wine, I suppose the only added extra is you're trying to inject some sort of fun into the idea that there's joy at the end of it, because obviously some of the headlines are so heavy. And in your case, I'm wondering along the years whether you ever found yourself reading a headline that you thought, oh, this is just...
Yes, I mean, it can be very, very gloomy. But we, in the news business, I'm afraid, gravitate towards a number of bad things. The news very infrequently opens with, here's some good news today.
You're never going to believe this.
That'd be very nice, wouldn't it?
Yeah,
You'll never believe this. That's a good line. But we never tend to do that, do we? So it's always, we look at what's happening now in Afghanistan or whatever. That always tends to be leading the news. Yeah. Yeah.
And you met some pretty grim characters along the way as well. I mean, Saddam Hussein most notably. Were you in fear of your life when you were around him?
I was terrified. Not about in fear of my life. I was terrified about what... I discovered very early on, to begin the story, that the Iraqi security apparatus was very tight, very strong. And I was rather worried about getting out. Having got in, you'd be fine. But I was rather worried, especially after my interview with Saddam, that they will say, we're not terribly happy about what you've done and you'll have to stay here for a while. And so I left rather in a hurry. I mean, I was in Jordan the following afternoon.
I bet.
I got out very quickly. But he himself was, fine. But I was rather worried about the people around him.
Yeah.
The security was very, very, very tight. We got into a car to go to the president's palace and not being told where we were going. And I remember saying to a colleague who was sitting in the back with me, I said, have you ever got into a car not knowing where you're being taken? And she didn't think that was terribly funny. But it was very, very, very strange. And then we were taken to a presidential guest house where nobody said anything about timing of anything.
Really?
And when in the evening we were there for dinner, and on this table there were a range of juices, and I asked the manager of this institution, I said, is it possible that we could get some wine? And I called up and got some. What frightened me then, I remember, was he said, yes, you can call up, but I'll have to reconnect the phones for you. So we were cut off in the days before mobile phones. I didn't know where I was. It was a presidential type guest house. I didn't know how long we were going to be there. I didn't know when the interview would take place. And there was just this dinner with a lot of grape juice. So I don't think we got some wine, but I managed to get some whiskey.
Well, I mean, here am I thinking I couldn't possibly think any more highly of you. And yet, in a crisis, when you're isolated alone and the world seems hopeless, you reach for a bottle of the good stuff.
You have to have yes. It's probably not a very wonderful, healthy worthwhile thing to say, but I'm afraid
Do you
it
know
does
what?
happen.
No, I think on the job and unwinding,
Yeah.
I've always felt there's nothing wrong with a glass or two because, it is sometimes demonised.
I think I'll have a little.
You must, yeah,
try of
cheers.
this, yes.
And
Oh,
also,
yes.
it for me,
Lovely.
it kind of, it does have that unique aroma, barrel fermented. So you get a little bit of richness, but then lots and lots
Lovely.
of richness. It's good, isn't it?
Montrachet, yes.
Yeah, it's good.
I tell you the one thing I've always remembered, though, there was this wonderful, well, can I politely say, it was just a public relations trick passed off on us about the Beaujolais Nouveau. Do you remember those days?
Yeah, I do.
And
I do. The race.
I shudder to think now how we all raced
I know.
to go and have the first.
Wasn't it a brilliant idea, though?
It was
the
such a
fresher the better.
brilliant campaign.
Yeah.
I'm afraid the product wasn't.
It wasn't.
And when you got up the following morning, you realised, because I think
Yeah.
it was doing a little bit of maturing in your stomach.
I think it was fermenting in your stomach. I don't think it was fully there, and you sort of feel it sloshing
I
around
know,
in your
it was not
ankles.
a great- But what a great.
No.
But I remember when I joined ITN for years.
Yeah.
We kept doing that, and we kept talking about it throughout the day. You must rush out to
Absolutely.
to get this new.
But it was such a stroke of
Beaujolais.
genius because wine has historically always been about, slowness, patience, waiting, and this idea that no, rapidity, the excitement, it's wacky races, you've got to get there in style, get back, who'll be the first. Do you remember that was that huge competition about
was
who
a
would
race,
be the
yeah.
It was a proper race.
Yeah.
There's been a little move to bring it back in the past year or two.
They'll have to find a better wine.
Well, yeah, I think they'll just have to do it differently.
With the greatest respect.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, they know the wine isn't, that particular style of Beaujolais isn't great, but the Beaujolais Cru, the kind of top-level villages,
Yes.
actually I really do rate. And, we're all in the same region of France as the wine we're drinking here, Burgundy, which has this long, wonderful history of interplay between people and place.
Yes.
And that's really why I think it kind of leads the pack. We're drinking Chardonnay, but it genuinely is one of the best glasses of Chardonnay you'll ever drink in the
The
world.
Chardonnay grape is fantastic. It's
I'm
absolutely
so
gorgeous.
pleased you say that because there are so many people you wouldn't believe who absolutely anything but Chardonnay, the ABC, it's still there.
And
it's
it
still a thing.
varies, doesn't it? You can get it fairly plain, but there's some with wonderful bouquet and flavour.
Yeah.
And it really is nice.
Yeah, and I think people often think of Chardonnay and think, it's going to be really oaky. This has, in fact, been fermented in an oak barrel, but it doesn't taste that rich. It actually tastes very fresh. And when you think of the great wines of the world, like Chablis or Champagne, or people are very happy to drink those. But
Sure.
there are, of course, Chardonnay. But yeah, I'm really happy you say that. I've actually just written a piece for the paper, 3 cheers for Chardonnay, because I can't believe I kind of have to go into bat for Chardonnay so often. But you'd be amazed, honestly. I'll pour it for people. I was quite relieved when you said you liked it.
Yeah. No. It's wonderful.
Have you actually got a memory of the kind of greatest wine moment of your life?
Oh, gosh. I think there were too many, really, to remember. I traveled a lot in America, presidential campaigns and other things. And the wine, of course, in America, after the Russian Revolution, a lot of people came over, and successive periods of turmoil in Europe.
Yeah.
And people came to America and they helped develop the American wine trade. And some of it is rather special.
Some of it is, yeah.
I remember you asked about a particular instance. One evening, we went in Carmel to what everybody says was Clint Eastwood's restaurant.
No way.
We were tourists who believed all this public relations talk too easily. And they said, you might catch a glimmer of Clint Eastwood there. Of course, that
Really?
was never, ever going to happen. But we all went. Anyway, that evening, I remember having, with my steak or whatever it was, some Russian River Valley Pinot Noir.
Yes.
That was absolutely superb.
Yeah.
Absolutely superb.
Can you remember what it was about it that you liked? Was it the silkiness or just the flavour or?
It was the flavour and the silkiness and a sort of wonderful bouquet and great flavour.
Yeah.
But just great taste. And
They do taste great, and I think some listeners
Some of it is quite good.
Some of it's incredible. I mean, Russian River is an absolute hub for cool climate. I mean, good Chardonnay as well, actually, but Pinot Noir. You have this wonderful kind of rolling mist that comes in the morning up the valley that acts like a bit of an air conditioning unit that keeps those vineyards really cool because, of course, America can get very, very warm in that part.
Yes,
of the world.
that's right.
Santa Barbara and all
But
around
I
there.
am right too, am I, in suggesting that the Russian influence in, was very
Absolutely,
pronounced.
but all across the world, I think waves of migration have really benefited wine wherever it's landed. You think of Italians moving to Mendoza, you think of all the farmers that went out to New Zealand, in Australia, but it's just been an extraordinary spreading of knowledge that sort of began really with Georgia and Greece, but really the Romans
New
disseminated
Zealand
it.
too is now
New Zealand's
some
incredible.
really, really good wine.
A country I absolutely love. The jaw-dropping, pristine scenery. Wherever you look, it feels like you've
Absolutely
been,
fantastic.
I always feel like an ant in Giant's country there. It's so beautiful. and so inspiring. And I've had some just great moments over a glass of wine. I remember I was up in North Island at Cumeo River drinking a Chardonnay like this one. And that's another fantastic wine estate, really world-class Chardonnay. And I was off to the Bay of Islands. My dad actually told me to go up there because he felt it was one of the few places on earth where you could really feel like the coming and going of your soul. And I thought, well, if Dad's saying that, I really ought to go and find it. I mean, I certainly saw some dolphins and enjoyed some craft beer. Whether I saw my soul come and go is another matter. But I got what he meant. It was that serenity of the place and also just endless inlets.
Yes.
But in your travels, are there places that you remember that you absolutely adore?
Well, I learned, not only traveling and having been there, but, discovering the wine, which you never thought about. I never thought of New Zealand as a wine producer. It just didn't occur to me. Went there, had some wine, and of course went to restaurants in London where you can get New Zealand wine. And it's absolutely fantastic. Yeah, so it's a good point you make, actually. You perhaps a little unwittingly at times just associate places with the wine you've had in some of those places.
There's got to be a book or something like Reminiscences over great glasses of wine.
Yes.
One of us has got to write that. Or maybe we do it together. Or maybe we go on a quest to find the best place, moment and glass.
We could probably begin the book in the Napa Valley because that's on my list of places I want to go to.
Have you not been?
I've not been
at
all.
It.
And I'm going to take myself there.
Since we're a few sips in, time for maybe a little bit more of a reflective question. There must be a person that you've shared a glass with that stands out, or that was just so extraordinarily mean and poured you a glass of absolute...
Yes, there were lots of instances in America where that happened. And, one of the things is I was there to work.
Yeah.
So you associate it very much with what you were doing as work. So I drank with quite a few important American politicians and so on, and in the course of work. You remember the instance, the interview, or, the place or what the crisis was about, but all done very nicely with a neat drink.
Have you got a favourite US politician? I know you're not supposed to have your favourites, or one that you respected.
It's a very interesting question. I interviewed President Bush the Younger before the Iraqi invasion. And this interview got very sticky, and he obviously didn't like being asked tough questions. It was rather difficult for him because there was really no concrete reason for invading Iraq. There were no weapons of mass destruction. Saddam Hussein had not had anything to do with the Al-Qaeda activity at 9/11. So the president was having great difficulty explaining exactly what the invasion was all about. And at one point he stopped and said, you were one of those clever journalists who were trying to trip me up. And I said, Mr. President, you were one of the first people who has ever said I'm clever outside my mother. Anyway,
beautiful.
He then said, I'll stop this interview, but I'll take you on a tour of the West Wing and the Oval Office. And I see that you throw your hands up thinking this is absolutely wonderful.
So cool.
At the moment, I did not see the glory of this because I had a 25-minute program and I had only got 10 minutes of the president. And I was thinking, what am I going to do for the rest of it? Anyway, it turned out to be much better than I thought.
Yeah, it'd be brilliant.
He took me around the West Wing, and we ended up in the Oval Office. And I was being shown around in the Oval Office by a sitting president of the United States.
Amazing.
And for days after, I kept saying to my colleagues, were we really in the Oval Office? And did he really show us around?
Yeah.
And I wished my mother could have been told about this because she'd have thought that the boy has not been a total failure.
Yes.
But it really were those glorious moments. And I suppose the point of the story, and it's one of the things I learned covering various political things, you look at somebody like President Bush, and ideologically, I couldn't possibly disagree with him more about the whole Iraqi adventure. He was, in fact, terribly warm, very genial, and an excellent host. Yeah. And I would always bless him for taking me around the Oval Office. So, you always focus and you remember some of those things.
I'm absolutely blown away by that story because I try and place myself in that situation, being in the Oval Office and, what it smells like.
I know. And I remember so many details about it. He kept referring to me as Sir Trevor, Sir Trevor. And I said to him, Mr. President, you're a republic. You don't deal with these titles. And then I put my foot in it by saying, and in some cases, some of these titles are not really merited, and they don't matter very much. And he said, "Oh, you mustn't say that. My father has one." And of course, the elder Bush was given honorary title by the Queen. Yeah. So I really put my foot in it there.
You mentioned putting your foot in it. I mean, I can't remember you ever having an actual howler, but
My life has been filled with
I can't believe you
howlers.
think
They've
that. 'Cause
gone all through.
to me, it's just serene. It's just
Oh,
absolutely
no.
super professional.
We made one classic mistake once, waiting for a plane to bring back hostages from Beirut, John McCarthy and the others. And what you forget is that planes land and they go a mile down the runway and they take a half hour to come back and they take another half hour to disgorge their passengers. In that time, News at 10 is over. It has begun and gone. So, yeah, that was a tragic thing. And I kept referring to RAF something as RAC or something. I remember kept doing it. And one of my colleagues, when I went back to the office, says, "Hi, Trev, the AA have called up about getting reciprocal rating."
Reciprocal
You
mention.
know, I know, yeah.
But it's
You remember your mistakes.
it's funny they do haunt you, don't they?
They play
But it's
with
like
you.
it's like sort of mean comments on social media these days. They do sort of rattle around and have a
Yeah,
disproportionate
yeah. Oh, yes.
influence on us.
Yeah, yeah.
It's the way we're built, I suppose.
Yeah.
I was going to ask you about social media actually, because the nature of news now, and I slightly sigh because I loved being able to source my news from what I would say are, obviously some have their political leanings, some journalists, some outlets, but you felt like the work had been done on the story. And these days there's so much conjecture and opinion, it seems to me, that's passed off as a headline or as a fact. It concerns me.
I must make a confession that I'm not on social media at all. And I'm not in a position to comment, objectively about it. But from what I hear, there are many problems about it. And the way not only news, but false stories are, generated. And the business of trying to correct all of that stuff.
Yeah, and I sort of think, there's a lot of me that really feels hopeful about the democratization of communication.
Yes.
But that comes with it. But the reason I think it would be both tricky and delicious to see you on social media is because I think you'd probably have to slug it out with David Attenborough to be the most loved person in Britain.
Yes.
And that would be a wonderful
Yes.
match.
But he is absolutely wonderful.
He's delightful, isn't
And
he?
if that's his title, I think he well deserved.
How aware are you, though, of the fondness with which the nation holds you in their heart?
Oh, well, I mean, it's rather nice when people are, complimentary about the work you do.
Yeah.
I mean, the extraordinary fact is that you get terribly, terribly introspective and worried about, your work. I've just done something about the Fred West killings, and you get terribly involved in the story and, discovering things that you didn't know before and so on. And then you wait for what the wonderful world will say about it all. And people are generally very nice. Nobody slaps you on the back in the street and say, "You are the worst news reader I've ever seen." But they come up and say, "I watch your news and I think you can do this rather well." So it's really nice. But you have to have a balance and realize that we all keep trying to do better and better. The world gets more complicated. The stories get more complicated. And you're constantly just behind trying to make sense of it all.
Yeah.
And it's a difficult job, So you don't get too head up on complimenting yourself and what you've done. Next crisis, next problem, next matter of international concern, and you try to get a handle on that.
Do people call you up for advice? And I'm asking, kind of journalists, but also heads of state and people in positions of power in companies and so forth.
Well, one of the nicest things is when people say, I have a son who, in the West Indies, you're supposed to be a doctor or a lawyer. And they said, but, having seen you, I think maybe the media is not a bad job. I laugh occasionally at that because it can be read in different ways, Having looked at you and I thought, if you could do it, then my son could. But no, it's generally said very nicely.
Yeah, but it's a tricky industry to navigate as well and to have an enduring career in the media. And I think more and more so these days, there's some fairly sharp elbows out there. And as the voices are
It's difficult. It's difficult.
It is
and I
hard,
think there's one misperception that I think is out there is that there is a perception, there's a multiplicity of channels. There's so many now that everybody can find a place in it. And that is not really the case. It's still, I think, exceedingly difficult, challenging, and you really have to work hard. One of the things I've learned about the programs I've done recently is that the young people involved are extremely bright. They're really, really brilliant people. And I've felt that without that brilliance, without that dedication, they would never have got that position.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think the hard-working nature as
Yeah,
well,
yeah.
and the long hours and all of that goes with the job.
Yeah.
But presumably when you turn up on set, they're absolutely terrified. And really, to them, it's super important to be the best they can be on the day, because you bring a massive amount of credibility and, the
Well,
responsibilities on
that's
them.
nice. But I found the reverse is also true, because I've discovered some young people who I just, young lady come into the room and challenges at meetings, on the various points of things. And they're absolutely brilliant. I've been terribly fortunate to work with some really, really great people.
So how do you go about in terms of researching your stories these days? I mean, there must be just a multiplicity of ways to do it.
Yeah.
But it must have changed radically in the last 20 years.
Yes, but the team you work with are important in this. And most of the stuff that I do, they're really well into the research. And it's a case of collaboration between you both. And to establish that, and to establish a kind of secure working pattern of doing the programs is very, very important.
I'd love to see you strolling around the vineyards, describing your impressions.
This is a point for another story. I once put up to, I think it was to ITV, and I said, I would love to do a program about the Napa Valley and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah,
and
you should.
the idea went up. Somebody came back and said, no, I think that's a very bad idea. We would never get Trevor back. And I think that was a very wise comment, because I think I would love to go to Napa Valley. I would love to do a program there. But to be very honest, my joy about even thinking of going there is really about enjoying it without the need of doing a program.
Doing the work.
and just-
There is so much truth to that.
One more glass for me, Ollie. Please.
Growing up in the West Indies, can you recall what your first drink was at the bar? Or maybe it wasn't at the bar.
Well, yes, it was always, I was terribly lucky to have the most wonderful father in the world. And at a very young age, he tried to help us to drink sensibly. And so at meal times and so on, my father would say, you must try this, there's a sherry here, which you must try. And I think that gave me a love, but also respect of the thing. And I think that's probably,
Super important.
even in our adult lives, the most important thing, to respect the drink and what the drink can do, and to treat it with that respect. And if I have attained any of that at all, it's because of my father's tutelage, which is wonderful.
That's delightful, because I couldn't agree with you more on that. I think the balance of respect also brings more enjoyment.
Yeah, and one of the reasons that you don't want to drink too much in one evening is because you want to have a drink the following evening as well.
I love you even more, yes.
And if you have too much on one evening, then maybe the second evening you think, oh,
I won't.
I'm not feeling too well. So it's one of the things you learn to enjoy continuously.
Yes.
And I do have great admiration for my friends who said I'm having a week off wine and so on. I've struggled to
Why?
do the same, but respect.
Respect and enjoyment. And I think the motivation, I love the motivation, the idea that drink a little bit more in a circumspect, respectful way so that you can continue to do so tomorrow. That's a beautiful thought, because it just completely explains very succinctly why hangovers get in the way.
Yeah.
We don't need them.
In everything, a bit of self-control and
Discipline.
Yeah.
That's what it comes down
And
to.
discipline, yeah.
So, just as we reflect back, how's the wine going down, by the way? Now we're just
Excellent,
talking about discipline. I'm
excellent.
so pleased. Have you got any memories of things, opportunities that maybe got away that you would have thought, actually, I really wish that had come off?
Yes, I'm sure there are many, but I have been so terribly lucky in getting to do so many great things. And luck played a great deal of part. Of course, everybody worked hard, but you have to be lucky. I look back and, doing things with Mandela and some of the other big interviews I've done. To be chosen to do those things is a great, great matter of luck. And so I don't think too much or reflect too much on the ones I've missed. I revel in the generosity of my colleagues and so on, who gave me the chance to do the ones I did do. I don't look back and think, oh, I would have loved to have done that. And most of those are really in the time. So this week, for example, you'd want probably to talk to somebody in the Taliban. Or this week, it might be people who had to do with 9/11 or whatever. Next week, it might be another issue. The agenda changes, and we strive to keep up with it. And so I revel in the memories of the ones that I did do and hope you did it justice, and you look back and you always look back and see the funny side of a lot of these things, now, which you didn't then because it was much too serious then. And that's a great, great luxury.
It's been a great, great luxury to hear your tales. So, Trevor, thank you so much.
Well,
for
thank you
joining
very
me.
much for asking me, and thanks for the wine.
Do, 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 do.
thanks for listening to A Glass With. I mean, Sir Trevor MacDonald, what a legend. An absolute thrill to welcome him to the show. If you're interested in finding out more about the wine, Domaine Jacques Prieur was the name of the producer, and it was Pouligny Montrachet Les Combettes Premier Cru 2017. I sourced mine in the UK from Corney & Barrow, so my thanks to them. Also thanks to everyone at the River Cafe. It really was one of the greatest lunches of my life. And I would also like to thank Anita Land, Pippa Stevens, Sophie and Ellie, and all the guys at Podmonkey for the terrific work that they do in bringing this podcast to your ears. I'm wishing you well, raising my glass, and looking forward very much to sharing a glass with, well, you next time. Cheers. What's in your glass? What are you doing with it? And how do you like to do it? That's the sort of conversation we should be having. You can find me at my website, olliesmith.com, or via Instagram at olliesmith. If you've enjoyed listening to A Glass With, then subscribe wherever you get podcasts, and if you've really enjoyed it, please give us a rating. Cheers! A Glass with me, Ollie Smith, is produced by Matt and Scott at Podmonkey and edited by James at Podmonkey. Our music is by Nicholas Alexander, arranged and performed by Barber Shopogram.
Let's have a glass with Ollie Smith.